For 3 centuries, humanity had been the galaxy's punching bag, the Stellar Council's golden children, always bending over backward to accommodate alien demands, always finding diplomatic solutions when others chose violence, always taking the moral high ground even when it cost them dearly. The other species saw this as weakness. They were wrong. Every civilization has a breaking point, that moment when patience transforms into something far more dangerous. For humanity, that moment came not with a roar, but with silence. When the humans finally stopped talking, the galaxy learned why they had been talking so much in the first place. Some species are born warriors. Others become warriors through necessity. But the most terrifying warriors are those who choose peace until peace is no longer an option. The Stellar Council was about to discover why humanity had spent so much time perfecting the art of war while preaching the virtues of peace. 3 words would echo across 1,000 worlds. Humans End Talks. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the towering crystalline structure of the Stellar Council chambers, her hands clenched at her sides as she watched the holographic display that would change everything. The image showed the smoldering remains of New Haven Colony, where 37,000 human civilians had lived just 48 hours ago. Now it was nothing but ash and twisted metal floating in the void of space. The Zephyrian fleet responsible for the attack hung in formation near the debris field, their ships gleaming with fresh battle scars and pride. Admiral Kekstar had personally transmitted a message claiming the colony was harboring weapons of mass destruction, though the only evidence presented was a grainy sensor reading that could have been anything from mining equipment to agricultural machinery. Sarah had seen this pattern before. The hegemony species would manufacture evidence, attack human settlements, then retreat behind the protection of the Stellar Council's complex legal framework. Humanity would file complaints, present counter-evidence, and engage in months of diplomatic proceedings that inevitably ended in minor sanctions and empty promises of future cooperation. Ambassador Chen, the melodious voice of High Counselor Tis, filled the chamber. The serpentine alien scales shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that indicated mild annoyance. We have reviewed your emergency petition regarding the New Haven incident. While regrettable, initial evidence suggests the Zephyrian action was within the bounds of self-defense protocols outlined in Section 847C of the Galactic Safety Charter. The other council members, representing the 14 major species that controlled galactic politics, nodded in agreement. Sarah recognized the routine. The Zephyrians were part of the hegemony, the alliance of 6 species that had been systematically expanding their territory at humanity's expense for the past 30 years. The Council always found reasons to justify their actions. High Counselor, Sarah's voice remained steady despite the rage building in her chest. The evidence clearly shows this was an unprovoked attack on a civilian agricultural colony. Our sensor logs, witness testimonies, and the complete absence of any military installations, interrupted Counselor Vrax, the insectoid Manthari representative. His compound eyes glittered with disdain. Humans have proven quite creative with their storytelling in previous incidents. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled diplomats. Sarah felt the familiar weight of 3 centuries of accumulated frustration. Her great-grandmother had stood in these same chambers, pleading for justice when the Koratai had claimed 3 human worlds based on an ancient territorial dispute that mysteriously surfaced just as humanity discovered valuable mineral deposits there. Her grandfather had argued cases here when the Nexus Confederation began systematically excluding human traders from profitable shipping routes. Her mother had spent her career fighting legal battles that humanity rarely won. The Zephyrian Admiral has agreed to pay reparations, High Counselor Thys continued, his tone suggesting magnanimous compromise. 50,000 credits per confirmed casualty plus infrastructure replacement costs not to exceed 2 million credits total. 50,000 credits was less than the annual salary of a junior diplomat. 2 million wouldn't even cover the transportation costs to relocate the survivors, much less rebuild their lives. High Counselor, that amount is insulting. These were human lives, not livestock. New Haven represented 15 years of terraforming work and the matter is decided. Counselor Zethara of the Valdris species spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Unless humanity wishes to formally challenge the Council's judgment through combat trials, the ruling stands. The chamber fell silent. Combat trials were an ancient tradition, theoretically available to all species but practically impossible for humanity to utilize. The trials required champions from each species' warrior caste, and humanity famously had no warrior caste. They had soldiers, certainly, but the Stellar Council had long ago ruled that humanity's military was merely a defensive organization, not a true warrior culture like the Zephyrians or Karate. Sarah looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of alien diplomats who had grown comfortable with humanity's predictable responses. They expected her to file an appeal, request a review committee, or perhaps threaten to withdraw from some minor trade agreement. They expected her to keep talking. Instead, Sarah reached into her diplomatic case and withdrew a simple crystal data storage device. She placed it on the podium before her and activated its holographic projector. The device displayed Earth's official seal, followed by a brief text message that appeared in every major galactic language simultaneously. By order of the United Earth Government and the Colonial Defense Council, humanity formally withdraws from all diplomatic relations with the Stellar Council and its member species, effective immediately. All existing treaties, trade agreements, and cooperative accords are hereby terminated. Human territory is now considered sovereign and independent, with full rights of self-defense against any incursion. The chamber erupted in shocked chatter. High Counselor Thys raised his head, scales flickering in patterns of confusion and irritation. Ambassador Chen, surely you cannot be serious. Humanity has been part of the galactic community for over 3 centuries. Your species lacks the military capability to exist independently. This is clearly an emotional reaction to, this is humanity's final diplomatic communication with the Stellar Council, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying a cold authority that silenced the room. We have concluded that diplomacy with this body is both futile and beneath our dignity. We will no longer participate in elaborate charades designed to legitimize the systematic oppression of our people. She gathered her materials and turned toward the exit, but Counselor Vrax's harsh voice stopped her. And what exactly do humans intend to do now? Wage war against 14 species with your pitiful fleet of cargo haulers and mining ships? Your entire military consists of perhaps 200 actual warships, most of them converted civilian vessels. Sarah paused at the chamber's entrance and looked back over her shoulder. For just a moment, her diplomatic mask slipped, and something ancient and dangerous flickered in her eyes. Counselor Vrax, your intelligence estimates are 3 months out of date. You might want to update them. As the chamber doors sealed behind her, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The political phase was over. Everything that happened next would be decided by different rules entirely. Back on Earth, the message had already been transmitted to every human colony, outpost, and starship in known space. The response was immediate and overwhelming. It was about time. Admiral Marcus Webb stood in the command center of the Luna shipyards, watching as the final components were installed on humanity's newest class of warship. The Retribution-class dreadnought stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull bristling with weapon systems that represented 3 decades of clandestine research and development. Admiral, his aide approached with a datapad. Confirmation from all colonial fleets. Operation Reckoning is ready to commence on your order. Webb nodded, his weathered face showing the strain of carrying humanity's greatest secret for so many years. While the diplomats had talked and negotiated and pleaded for justice, humanity's military had been preparing for the day when talking would no longer be enough. Signal all fleet commanders, Webb said quietly. Humanity has spoken its last words to the Stellar Council. Now we speak in a language they'll understand. The Luna shipyards erupted in activity as massive hangar doors opened to reveal not just the Retribution, but dozens of similar vessels that had been constructed in complete secrecy. Hidden shipyards scattered throughout human space began powering up their own fleets, ships that had been built under the cover of asteroid mining operations and deep space construction projects. Across the galaxy, alien intelligence networks scrambled to understand what was happening. The humans had stopped talking, stopped filing complaints, stopped engaging in the political theater that had defined their relationship with the rest of galactic civilization. The sudden silence was more terrifying than any threat they had ever made. In the Zephyrian home system, Admiral Kekstar reviewed the reports from his intelligence officers with growing confusion. Human ships were moving throughout their territory, but not in the patterns of retreat or evacuation that would be expected from a species abandoning galactic civilization. Instead, they moved with purpose and coordination that suggested careful planning. "Sir," his tactical officer approached hesitantly, "our long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures from human space. It appears they're activating industrial facilities we didn't know existed." Kekstar dismissed the report with a wave of his clawed hand. "Humans have always been industrious. They're probably preparing for some sort of economic isolation. Without access to galactic trade networks, they'll need to become more self-sufficient." But deep in his command ship's sensor analysis center, junior officers were discovering something that would soon shake the foundations of galactic power. The energy signatures weren't from manufacturing plants or mining operations. They were from weapons production facilities on a scale that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about human capabilities. The first indication that something fundamental had changed came when human merchant vessels began arriving at alien ports with termination notices for all existing contracts. Captain Elena Vasquez walked into the Trade Authority office on Cority Prime with a simple message. Humanity was withdrawing from all commercial relationships effective in 72 hours. Any alien vessels in human space had the same time frame to depart voluntarily. "You can't be serious," the Cority Trade Minister sputtered, his gray skin flushing with indignation. "Our economies are integrated. Humans provide 40% of our agricultural imports. Your sudden withdrawal will cause massive food shortages." Elena shrugged, her expression carefully neutral. "The Stellar Council determined that our agricultural products were of such low value that attacking our colonies was justified. We've decided to agree with that assessment and focus our production on domestic consumption." Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds as human representatives delivered the same message with mechanical efficiency. 3 centuries of patient cooperation were ending overnight, and the economic implications were staggering. The hegemony species had grown dependent on human manufacturing, agriculture, and mining operations. Human colonies produced nearly 60% of the galaxy's food surplus and controlled key mining operations in 17 star systems. The humans had been so cooperative, so willing to accept disadvantageous trade terms that most species had never considered what would happen if that cooperation ended. But the true scope of humanity's preparations didn't become clear until the alien intelligence services began analyzing the data from their covert surveillance networks in human space. What they discovered contradicted every assumption about human military capabilities. The mining operations that had been dismissed as evidence of humanity's peaceful nature were revealed to be massive resource extraction efforts supporting military production. The scientific research stations scattered throughout human space weren't studying stellar phenomena or agricultural techniques, they were weapons development facilities. The peaceful trading fleets that had carried goods throughout the galaxy for centuries were actually sophisticated intelligence-gathering operations that had mapped every military installation, trade route, and strategic resource in alien space. Most shocking of all was the discovery that humanity's apparent weakness had been carefully orchestrated. The small military fleet that aliens had mocked was indeed tiny, but it was only the visible portion of a much larger force that had been hidden away for decades. As the 72-hour deadline approached, alien governments scrambled to understand what they were facing. Emergency sessions of the Stellar Council were called, but humanity's representatives were notably absent. Diplomatic communications sent to Earth and human colonies went unanswered. The species that had built their power on their ability to manipulate galactic politics suddenly found themselves cut off from a third of the galaxy's productive capacity with no way to negotiate a solution. The silence was deafening, and it carried a message that every species understood regardless of their native language. The humans were done talking. The first demonstration of human military capability came not through a massive battle, but through a single, precisely executed operation that shattered every assumption about human warfare doctrine. The target was Nexus Station, the massive trade hub that served as the economic heart of the Manthari Collective and had been built partly on land seized from human colonists 40 years earlier. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Vindication, one of humanity's new Retribution-class dreadnoughts, watching as her task force approached the heavily fortified station. Nexus Station was protected by over 300 defense platforms, a fleet of 200 warships, and the kind of overlapping defensive systems that had made it a symbol of Manthari military engineering. "Ma'am," her tactical officer reported, "enemy fleet is moving to intercept." "Admiral Kexoth is demanding immediate withdrawal, or they'll open fire." Elena smiled coldly. Admiral Kexoth had commanded the fleet that destroyed the human research station at Kepler's Rest, killing 800 civilian scientists and their families. The Stellar Council had ruled it a regrettable misunderstanding and imposed a fine of 200,000 credits. Elena had been looking forward to this meeting for 5 years. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Operation Clean Sweep is authorized. Rules of engagement are active." Dr. Rusty showed no present of detrition. Instead, they demonstrated a completely different approach to space warfare. The Vindication and her sister ship suddenly accelerated far beyond what alien intelligence had believed human vessels could achieve. They didn't move toward the enemy fleet in the predicted attack patterns. Instead, they scattered in what appeared to be a chaotic retreat, moving at velocities that strained even their own crews. "They're running," Admiral Quexoth observed with satisfaction from his flagship. Human cowardice reveals itself when faced with superior force. "All ships pursue and destroy." The Manthari fleet gave chase, spreading out to intercept the fleeing human vessels. It was exactly what Elena had hoped they would do. "All ships execute Phoenix Protocol," she commanded. The scattered human vessels suddenly reversed direction with impossible precision, their advanced maneuvering systems allowing turns that would have torn apart alien ships. But instead of engaging the now dispersed Manthari fleet, they ignored the enemy warships entirely and focused their fire on Nexus Station itself. The station's massive shields flared to life, designed to absorb the kind of sustained bombardment that traditional fleet engagement would provide. They were not designed for what the humans brought to bear. Each human dreadnought carried weapons that represented 30 years of military research focused on a single goal: the complete destruction of heavily fortified positions. The energy beams that lanced out from their hulls didn't just penetrate the station's shields, they tore through them as if they weren't there. Admiral Kexoth watched in horror as Nexus Station, the pride of Manthari engineering and the symbol of their military dominance, was systematically dismantled in less than 20 minutes. The human weapons didn't just destroy, they surgically removed specific systems with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of the station's construction. "They're targeting the command centers, the shield generators, and the docking bays," his tactical officer reported in disbelief. "Sir, they know exactly where every critical system is located. The station's defensive platforms opened fire on the human ships, but their weapons seem to have no effect." The human vessels moved through the defensive fire as if it were rain, their shields absorbing impacts that should have crippled any known ship design. Within 30 minutes of the engagement beginning, Nexus Station was a drifting hulk. Its weapons were offline, its shields were down, its command structure was destroyed, and its docking facilities were twisted wreckage, but not a single civilian had been harmed. The humans had somehow managed to destroy a military installation while leaving the residential and commercial sections completely intact. The Manthari fleet, which had been chasing what they thought were fleeing human ships, found themselves scattered across the system and completely out of position to defend their primary strategic asset. When they attempted to regroup for a counterattack, they discovered that the human ships had vanished into hyperspace as quickly as they had arrived. Admiral Kexoth stared at the wreckage of what had been the most heavily defended position in Manthari space, destroyed by a human force that had appeared from nowhere, accomplished its mission with surgical precision, and disappeared before any effective response could be organized. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." The main screen activated to show Commander Vasquez sitting calmly in her command chair. Behind her, the bridge crew of the Vindication worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had just completed a routine operation. "Admiral Kexoth," Vasquez said, her voice carrying the same conversational tone that Admiral Webb had used in his earlier transmission. "Nexus Station has been neutralized as a military asset. Your civilian population is unharmed and will be permitted to evacuate safely. This operation serves as a demonstration of humanity's commitment to proportional response." Quexoth's mandibles clicked with rage. "This is an act of war, human. The Mantari Collective will respond with overwhelming force." Vasquez shrugged. "Admiral, you destroyed Kepler's Rest and killed 800 of our people. We destroyed your military station and killed none of yours. By any reasonable standard, you came out ahead in this exchange. I suggest you keep that in mind before escalating further." The transmission ended, leaving the Manthari fleet alone with the wreckage of their supposedly impregnable fortress. The lesson was clear. Humanity had moved beyond the rules of engagement that had defined galactic warfare for centuries. They weren't interested in occupying territory or conquering populations. They were interested in removing the military capability of anyone who threatened their people. News of the Nexus Station operation spread through alien space with the speed of quantum communications. Within hours, every species in the galaxy had access to detailed sensor recordings of human ships moving at impossible velocities, firing weapons of unprecedented power and coordinating their actions with a precision that suggested decades of training and preparation. For 3 centuries, alien military doctrine had been built on the assumption that humans were technologically inferior and strategically naive. The destruction of Nexus Station demonstrated that both assumptions were catastrophically wrong. On Karate Prime, Fleet Admiral Gentak convened an emergency meeting of his senior staff to analyze the human attack. The recording showed capabilities that challenged everything they thought they knew about space warfare. "How fast were those ships moving?" he demanded. His chief engineer looked sick. "Conservative estimates suggest they were maintaining velocities 30% higher than our theoretical maximums for vessels of that size. The stress forces alone should have killed their crews. And their weapons? Power output consistent with planetary bombardment systems but focused through beam guides that allowed pinpoint accuracy. Sir, they were using weapons designed to crack planets for precision strikes on individual components of the station." Zentak leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of 3 centuries of military tradition crumbling around him. "Analysis of their tactical doctrine? They're not fighting the same kind of war we are," his tactical officer reported. "Traditional fleet engagement assumes both sides want to control territory or achieve political objectives through military victory. The humans aren't trying to conquer anyone, they're trying to remove the ability of their enemies to threaten human populations. It's a completely different strategic framework." The implications were staggering. Alien military forces were organized around the concept of conquering and holding territory, projecting power across space, and achieving political objectives through the threat or application of military force. Human military doctrine, as demonstrated at Nexus Station, seemed focused on the systematic elimination of threats through overwhelming application of technological superiority. But the most disturbing aspect of the human demonstration wasn't their technological advantage or their tactical innovation. It was the realization that they had been holding back for 3 centuries while their enemies grew comfortable with the existing balance of power. In the Zephyrian home system, Admiral Kextar received reports from his intelligence networks throughout human space that painted an increasingly terrifying picture. The fleet that had destroyed Nexus Station was just one of dozens of similar task forces operating throughout the galaxy. More disturbing still, reconnaissance probes had detected massive human shipyards that were producing new warships at a rate that suggested they had been planning for large-scale conflict for generations. "Sir," his intelligence chief reported, "we've identified at least 47 major construction facilities in human space, most of them hidden inside asteroid fields or concealed behind natural formations. Production estimates suggest they're completing approximately 200 new warships per month." Kekstar felt something cold settle in his stomach. 200 per month? Yes, sir. At that production rate, they could replace their entire visible fleet every 6 weeks. But, sir, there's something else. The energy signature suggests these aren't just building warships, they're building something larger. Before Kekstar could ask for clarification, his communications officer interrupted with an urgent message. "Sir, priority transmission from High Command. The humans have issued a galaxy-wide broadcast." The main screen activated to show Admiral Webb once again, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood representatives from every human colony, military commanders from throughout human space, and civilian leaders whose faces carried the determination of a species that had finally decided to stop accepting injustice. "To the governments of the galaxy," Webb began, "the demonstration at Nexus Station represents humanity's new policy regarding threats to our people. For 3 centuries we have absorbed attacks, endured injustices, and accepted losses in the hope that rational discourse could resolve our differences. That era is over." The image shifted to show tactical displays of human military assets throughout the galaxy. The alien intelligence services had known about perhaps 10% of what was actually there. "We are not interested in conquest. We are not interested in tribute. We are not interested in ruling over alien populations or seizing alien territory. We are interested in ensuring that humanity is never again treated as an acceptable target for aggression." The display showed detailed schematics of human weapon systems, ship designs, and military installations. Information that should have been classified beyond any level alien intelligence could penetrate was being shared openly. And the message was clear. Humanity wasn't hiding their capabilities anymore because they no longer needed to. Any species that chooses to continue the policies of the past will discover that humanity is prepared to respond with measures proportional to the threat presented. "We have the capability to destroy any military force in the galaxy. We have the technology to cripple any economy. We have the strategic patience to outlast any opponent." The broadcast shifted to show massive construction projects that dwarfed anything aliens had imagined. Shipyards that could build entire fleets, industrial centers that could support prolonged military campaigns, research facilities that were clearly working on technologies beyond current galactic understanding. But we are also prepared to offer a different path forward. Any species that wishes to establish genuine diplomatic relations with humanity based on mutual respect rather than assumed superiority, we have much to offer those who treat us as equals. The transmission ended, leaving alien governments across the galaxy to grapple with a new reality. Humanity had emerged from 3 centuries of apparent weakness to reveal capabilities that made them the dominant military power in known space. But rather than using that power for conquest, they were offering their former tormentors a choice: treat humanity with respect or face the consequences of continued aggression. The choice seemed simple, but 3 centuries of assumed superiority over humanity had created political and cultural structures throughout alien civilization that made accepting human equality almost impossible to contemplate. The Stellar Council that had dismissed human complaints for generations would have to acknowledge that they had been wrong about everything. Military leaders who had built their careers on the assumption of human weakness would have to accept that they faced an enemy far more capable than anything they had prepared for. Most difficult of all, entire species would have to confront the possibility that their treatment of humanity had been not just wrong but catastrophically stupid. They had pushed the most powerful species in the galaxy until that species decided to stop accepting abuse and start delivering consequences. The age of human patience was over, and the galaxy was about to discover what happened when the most dangerous warriors were the ones who had tried hardest to avoid war. The hegemony's response came 72 hours after the Nexus Station demonstration. 6 species that had spent decades coordinating their exploitation of human resources announced the formation of the Grand Alliance, pledging to combine their military forces and drive humanity back to their home system where they belonged. The announcement was broadcast across the galaxy with all the pomp and ceremony that alien propaganda machines could muster. Admiral Kextar stood at the center of the largest fleet assembly in galactic history, watching as nearly 2,000 warships from 6 different species formed up in the void between star systems. The combined might of the Zephyrian Navy, Korathi Empire, Manthuri Collective, Nexus Confederation, Valdris Hegemony, and Thraxan Republic represented centuries of military tradition and technological development. "This ends today," he declared to his assembled commanders. "Humanity has grown too bold, forgotten their place in the galactic order. We will remind them that numbers and industrial capacity cannot overcome the warrior spirit that has driven our species to greatness." The alien fleet began its advance toward human space with the confidence of predators approaching wounded prey. Intelligence reports suggested that humanity's military assets were scattered throughout the galaxy, their forces committed to maintaining control over captured positions. The aliens would strike at the heart of human space while their military was overextended, crushing Earth's defenses and forcing humanity back into the subordinate role they had occupied for 3 centuries. But as the Grand Alliance fleet crossed into human territory, they encountered something unexpected: nothing. The border systems that should have been defended by human patrol fleets were empty. The early warning stations that should have detected their approach and summoned reinforcements were silent. The defensive positions that human military doctrine should have established to protect their core worlds were simply not there. "Where are they?" Admiral Gentak demanded from his position commanding the Korathi contingent. "Our intelligence indicated significant human military presence throughout these systems." The absence of human forces was almost more disturbing than their presence would have been. No species in galactic history had ever left their core territory completely undefended, especially when facing an invasion by superior numbers. "Continue the advance," he ordered. "They're probably falling back to establish a defensive perimeter around their industrial centers." The Grand Alliance fleet pushed deeper into human space, expecting at any moment to encounter the kind of layered defensive positions that military logic dictated. Instead, they found system after system that seemed abandoned, with only automated mining operations and civilian infrastructure showing any signs of activity. It wasn't until they reached the outer boundaries of the Sol system that they finally encountered human military forces, and what they found defied every expectation. A single ship waited for them in the void between Jupiter and Saturn. It was massive beyond any warship design in the galactic databases, easily 3 times the size of the largest alien dreadnought. But more disturbing than its size was its stillness. It simply hung in space, weapons powered down, showing no signs of aggressive intent or defensive preparation. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "the human vessel is transmitting." The main screen activated to show Admiral Webb once more. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship seemed unnaturally quiet, as if its crew was waiting for something routine to occur. "Admiral Kextar," Webb said, consulting a datapad as if reading from a schedule. "You're approximately 6 hours ahead of our projections. We expected the Grand Alliance to take longer organizing such a large fleet movement." Impressive efficiency. Kextar felt his ridge-lined forehead furrow in confusion. The human's tone suggested they were discussing a scheduled meeting, not a military confrontation that would determine the future of galactic civilization. "Admiral Webb," Kextar replied, "you are outnumbered 2,000 to 1. Surrender now, and humanity will be permitted to return to its previous status within the galactic community." Webb looked up from his datapad with an expression of mild interest. "Admiral, do you know what the greatest advantage of being consistently underestimated is?" Before Kextar could respond, the space around the Grand Alliance fleet erupted in contact warnings. Sensors that had detected nothing moments before were suddenly tracking thousands of objects appearing throughout the system, but they weren't ships emerging from hyperspace or uncloaking devices revealing hidden positions. They were asteroids. Every piece of debris in the Sol system, from tiny meteoroids to massive planetoids, was moving. Engines that had been concealed for decades were firing, turning Jupiter's asteroid belt into a cloud of kinetic weapons accelerating toward the alien fleet at velocities that made evasive action impossible. Kinetic bombardment on this scale, Admiral Zentak whispered, watching his sensors track the incoming projectiles. They've turned their entire star system into a weapon. As the Grand Alliance fleet scrambled to respond to the kinetic assault, the space around them began to fill with human warships, not the few hundred vessels that alien intelligence had tracked, but thousands upon thousands of ships emerging from concealment positions throughout the system. They rose from the surfaces of moons where they had been hidden beneath camouflaged installations. They detached from asteroids where they had masqueraded as mining equipment. They emerged from the gas giant's atmospheric layers where they had been concealed by sensor interference. They appeared from behind planetary bodies where they had been waiting in perfect silence for this moment. Admiral Webb's voice cut through the chaos of alien communications as their fleet found itself surrounded by a human force that outnumbered them 10-1. For 3 centuries, Webb said, his tone still conversational, alien species have assumed that because humans prefer diplomacy, we are incapable of warfare. You've assumed that because we seek peaceful solutions, we haven't prepared for violent ones. You've assumed that our commitment to protecting civilian populations means we won't defend ourselves when attacked. The human fleet began to move. Not in the chaotic rush of battle, but with the precise coordination of a military force that had been rehearsing this exact scenario for decades. Each ship took its position with mechanical precision, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered every possible escape route. You've made the fundamental error of believing that a preference for peace indicates an inability to wage war. Today, we correct that misunderstanding. What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense, it was a demonstration of overwhelming technological and tactical superiority applied with surgical precision. The human fleet didn't attempt to destroy the alien ships. Instead, they systematically disabled every vessel in the Grand Alliance force. Weapon systems were burned out by precisely targeted energy beams. Propulsion systems were crippled by kinetic strikes that left life support intact. Communication arrays were severed by cutting beams that disabled coordination without harming crews. Within 2 hours, the most powerful military force ever assembled in galactic history was floating dead in space, completely helpless but with their crews unharmed. Admiral Kekstar sat in his darkened command center, emergency lighting casting strange shadows as his ship drifted powerless through the void. Around him, his crew worked frantically to restore basic systems while the reality of their situation sank in. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "preliminary damage assessment complete. Weapons offline, engines offline, shields offline. Life support is functional, but we're completely dead in space." Through the observation ports, Kekstar could see the human fleet maintaining perfect formation around the disabled alien vessels. Every ship in the Grand Alliance force had been reduced to the same helpless state with an efficiency that spoke of careful planning and overwhelming technological advantage. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "incoming transmission from Admiral Webb." The emergency screen flickered to life, showing the human commander once more. This time, however, his expression carried none of the conversational casualness of earlier transmissions. He looked like a teacher who had grown tired of dealing with disruptive students. "Admirals Kekstar, Zentak, and Keksoth," Webb began, addressing the 3 senior commanders of the Grand Alliance force, "your fleets have been neutralized. Your crews are unharmed. Your vessels will be towed to designated areas where they can be recovered by your respective governments once this matter is resolved." Kekstar found his voice. "What do you want, human?" "What I want," Webb replied, "is for this lesson to be understood throughout the galaxy. Humanity spent 3 centuries trying to resolve our differences through diplomatic means because we believed that rational beings could find peaceful solutions to their conflicts. We were wrong. The display behind Webb shifted to show tactical readouts from human fleets throughout the galaxy. The Grand Alliance had committed nearly 2/3 of their combined military strength to this assault, leaving their home systems defended by skeleton forces. Those skeleton forces were now facing their own encounters with human task forces. While you were assembling this invasion fleet, human forces have secured every major military installation in your territories. Your home fleets have been neutralized. Your orbital defense networks have been disabled. Your military-industrial centers have been placed under human control. The scale of the operation was staggering. While the aliens had been focused on organizing their Grand Alliance, humanity had been systematically dismantling the military infrastructure of 6 different species across dozens of star systems. The coordination required suggested a level of strategic planning that went beyond anything in recorded galactic history. This is not conquest, Webb continued. We have no interest in governing alien populations or occupying alien worlds. This is a correction of the balance of power that should have been established 3 centuries ago. Admiral Gentak's voice crackled over the communication channel. What are your demands? Webb consulted his datapad once more. The dissolution of the Stellar Council as currently constituted. The establishment of a new galactic government based on genuine equality between species rather than the systematic exploitation of weaker members. The payment of reparations for 3 centuries of damages inflicted upon human populations. And formal acknowledgement that humanity will no longer tolerate being treated as an acceptable target for aggression. The alien commanders absorbed the implications in silence. Webb wasn't just demanding an end to anti-human policies, he was demanding a complete restructuring of galactic civilization. And if we refuse? Kekstar asked. Webb shrugged. Admiral, you no longer have the military capability to refuse. Your fleets are disabled, your home systems are under human control, and your industrial capacity is subject to human oversight. The question isn't whether you'll accept these terms, but whether you'll accept them gracefully or continue to resist until your populations begin suffering from the economic consequences of prolonged military occupation. For the first time in the conversation, Webb's expression hardened. Understand this clearly. Humanity has moved beyond the point where alien opinions about our place in the galaxy matter. We tried for 3 centuries to earn your respect through cooperation and accommodation. Since that approach failed, we'll settle for your compliance through demonstration of superior power. The transmission ended, leaving the disabled alien fleets to contemplate their new reality. The species that had dominated galactic politics for centuries found themselves at the mercy of the human race they had dismissed as weak and irrelevant. The balance of power hadn't just shifted, it had been completely inverted overnight. On alien worlds throughout the galaxy, populations that had grown comfortable with their assumed superiority over humanity watched news broadcasts showing their most powerful military forces floating helplessly in human-controlled space. The psychological impact was devastating, but the economic consequences were even worse. With their military assets neutralized and their trade networks under human control, the hegemony species faced a choice that their leaders had never imagined having to make: accept humanity's terms for a new galactic order, or watch their civilizations collapse under the weight of economic isolation and military impotence. The age of human patience was over, and the galaxy was discovering that the most dangerous enemy was the one who had spent centuries preparing for a war they had hoped never to fight. 6 months after the Grand Alliance fleet met its fate in the Sol system, Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of Unity Station, humanity's newly constructed diplomatic center in neutral space. The station was a marvel of human engineering, built in just 4 months to serve as the headquarters for the reformed Galactic Council. Unlike the old Stellar Council chambers with their intimidating architecture designed to emphasize alien superiority, Unity Station was built on principles of genuine equality. The council chambers themselves reflected humanity's new approach to galactic governance. Instead of towering platforms that allowed some species to literally look down on others, the new design featured a circular arrangement where all representatives met at the same level. The human engineers had even accounted for the different atmospheric and gravitational requirements of various species, creating environmental zones that allowed everyone to participate in comfortable conditions. But the most significant change wasn't architectural. It was the composition of the council itself. Sarah took her seat as Earth's primary representative, noting the presence of delegates from over 40 species, including many that had never been permitted to participate in galactic government under the old system. The hegemony species that had dominated the Stellar Council for centuries now held only standard representative positions. Their ability to manipulate galactic politics through economic and military pressure permanently eliminated. High Counselor Thys, the former leader of the Stellar Council, sat in what had once been a position of supreme authority but now carried no more weight than any other delegate's voice. His bioluminescent patterns showed the subdued colors of resignation as he watched Sarah call the session to order. The Galactic Council recognizes the representative from the Zephyrian Republic, Sarah announced, her tone professional but carrying an authority that no alien delegate would have dreamed of challenging. Admiral Kekstar, now serving as a civilian diplomat after his military career ended with the destruction of the Grand Alliance, rose to address the assembly. The proud warrior who had once commanded the most feared fleet in Zephyrian history now spoke with the careful deference of someone who understood exactly how precarious his species' position had become. The Zephyrian Republic formally acknowledges its violations of the Galactic Protection Accords regarding the attack on New Haven Colony, he said, reading from a prepared statement. We accept full responsibility for the unprovoked assault on civilian populations and agree to pay the assessed reparations of 5 billion credits over the next 20 years. The Council accepts the Zephyrian acknowledgement. The reparations will be distributed to the survivors of New Haven Colony and their families, with oversight provided by the Human Colonial Relief Administration. The routine was repeated by representatives from the Cority Empire, Montari Collective, and each of the other species that had participated in 3 centuries of systematic aggression against human populations. One by one, they formally acknowledged their past actions, accepted responsibility for damages inflicted, and agreed to pay reparations that would help rebuild human communities devastated by alien attacks. But the most significant agenda item wasn't about the past. It was about the future structure of galactic civilization itself. The Council will now consider Resolution 2847. "A," Sarah announced. The establishment of the Galactic Defense Force under unified command structure. The resolution represented perhaps the most dramatic change in the new galactic order. Instead of each species maintaining independent military forces that could be used to threaten others, the new system would create a unified military command responsible to the Galactic Council as a whole. The commander of this unified force would be selected by council vote, but everyone understood that only one species possessed the military capability to make the system work. Admiral Webb appeared on the chamber's main display, transmitting from his flagship in human space. 6 months of directing humanity's military dominance over the galaxy had aged him, but his voice still carried the quiet authority that had reshaped galactic politics. The Human Colonial Defense Council accepts the nomination to command the Galactic Defense Force. We pledge to use this authority to protect all species from aggression regardless of their past relationships with humanity. The species that might have objected to human military leadership no longer possess the capability to resist, while the smaller species that had been oppressed under the old system enthusiastically supported any arrangement that would protect them from future exploitation. But Webb's next announcement surprised even the human delegates. Effective immediately, the Galactic Defense Force will begin integrating personnel from all member species into unified command structures. Alien officers who demonstrate competence and commitment to the new galactic order will be given positions of responsibility within the human-led military hierarchy. Now serving as the Cority delegate looked up in surprise. Admiral Webb, are you saying that alien personnel will serve in command positions within human military units? I'm saying, Webb replied, that the new galactic order depends on genuine cooperation between species, not merely human dominance imposed through superior firepower. Military integration is the fastest way to build the trust and shared commitment necessary for long-term stability. The offer was both generous and strategically brilliant. Species that had lost their independent military forces would be given the opportunity to participate in the new galactic defense structure, but only by accepting human leadership and demonstrating loyalty to the new system. It provided a path for rehabilitation while ensuring that human strategic interests remained paramount. Sarah watched the alien delegates absorb the implications. The old system had been built on rigid hierarchies and the systematic exclusion of weaker species from meaningful participation in galactic government. The new system offered genuine equality, but only for those willing to accept humanity's leadership in establishing and maintaining that equality. The Council recognizes the representative from the Thalorian Republic, Sarah announced, gesturing toward one of the smaller species that had been almost completely ignored under the old Stellar Council. The Thalorian delegate, a crystalline being whose species had been denied representation in galactic government for over 2 centuries, rose with visible emotion. The Thalorian Republic wishes to express our gratitude to humanity for ending the system that kept our people in bondage to the hegemony trade cartels. We pledge our full support for the new galactic order and request consideration for membership in the Galactic Defense Force. Similar statements came from dozens of species that had been marginalized under alien domination. The humans had done more than defeat the hegemony militarily, they had liberated entire civilizations that had been trapped in economic and political servitude for generations. But not everyone was pleased with the new arrangements. The Valdris hegemony protests the legitimacy of these proceedings, declared Councillor Zetharar, her voice carrying the same arrogant authority she had wielded in the old Stellar Council. Humanity has imposed its will through military force, not legitimate governance. This council represents conquest, not consensus. The chamber fell silent. Under the old system, a statement like that from a hegemony representative would have carried enormous weight, potentially fracturing any coalition that opposed their interests. Under the new system, it was merely the complaint of a defeated enemy trying to relitigate a war she had already lost. Sarah looked at Zethera with the kind of patient expression a teacher might use when dealing with a particularly slow student. Councillor Zethera, the Valdris hegemony participated in the Grand Alliance invasion of human space. Your military forces were neutralized, your government surrendered unconditionally, and your species accepted the terms of the new galactic order as a condition of maintaining your independence. If you wish to challenge the legitimacy of this council, you're welcome to withdraw from it and return to the military occupation status that preceded these negotiations.
The threat was delivered so casually that its implications took a moment to register.
Zethera could reject the new galactic order, but the alternative was direct human military governance of Valdris space with no representation whatsoever. The choice between accepting diminished influence and facing complete subjugation was not really a choice at all. The Valdris hegemony accepts the Council's authority, Zethara said quietly, her defeat complete. As the session continued, Sarah reflected on how completely the balance of galactic power had shifted. 6 months earlier, she had stood in the old Stellar Council chambers as humanity's representative, pleading for justice that would never come. Now she chaired a galactic government that operated on principles of genuine equality enforced by overwhelming human military superiority. The transformation hadn't been without cost. Establishing the new order had required humanity to abandon 3 centuries of diplomatic restraint and embrace the role of galactic hegemon that they had spent so long trying to avoid. But the alternative had been the continued systematic oppression of not just humanity but dozens of other species that lacked the power to resist hegemony exploitation. Admiral Webb appeared on the display once more, this time to deliver the final item of business.
The Galactic Defense Force has completed its initial survey of member species' military capabilities and strategic needs, he announced.
We are prepared to begin the integration process that will create the unified command structure outlined in the new Galactic Charter. The integration process was itself a masterpiece of strategic planning. Human technology would be shared with allied species, but only in ways that maintained humanity's overall advantage. Alien personnel would be integrated into human command structures, but in positions where their loyalty could be constantly evaluated. Former enemies would be given opportunities to prove their commitment to the new order, but always under circumstances where betrayal would be immediately detected and punished. Most importantly, the new system created incentives for cooperation rather than resistance. Species that embraced the new galactic order found themselves with access to human technology, protection from aggression, and genuine representation in galactic government. Species that resisted found themselves isolated, economically strangled, and facing the prospect of direct human intervention in their domestic affairs. As the session drew to a close, Sarah looked around the council chambers at representatives from species that had spent centuries assuming humanity would remain forever subordinate to their interests. The Zephyrians who had destroyed human colonies now apologized for their aggression and begged for inclusion in the new galactic community. The Korati who had seized human territory now paid reparations and accepted human oversight of their military rebuilding. The Manthari, who had excluded humans from profitable trade routes, now competed desperately for access to human markets. The age of human patience was indeed over, but it had been replaced by something more dangerous than alien aggression: human justice. The species that had exploited humanity's preference for diplomacy had discovered that humans were far more terrifying as enemies than they had ever been valuable as victims. But perhaps most remarkably, the new galactic order offered genuine hope for lasting peace. The systematic inequalities that had driven centuries of conflict were being replaced by structures that gave every species a stake in maintaining stability. The military dominance that had allowed the hegemony to oppress weaker civilizations was being replaced by a unified defense force committed to protecting all members equally. "This session of the Galactic Council is adjourned," Sarah announced. "The next session will convene in 30 days to review progress on military integration and the establishment of the new trade protocols." Many of them stopping to speak respectfully with Sarah about matters that would have been beneath their notice 6 months earlier. She reflected on the strange turn her career had taken. She had started as humanity's representative in a system designed to keep her species permanently disadvantaged. She had become the chairperson of a galactic government built on principles of equality enforced by human military supremacy. The future remained uncertain. Some alien species would undoubtedly attempt to resist the new order, requiring additional demonstrations of human resolve. Others might try to manipulate the system from within, necessitating constant vigilance from human intelligence services. The integration of alien personnel into human military structures would create opportunities for both cooperation and espionage. But for the first time in 3 centuries, humanity occupied the position in galactic civilization that their contributions had always merited. They were no longer the species that absorbed punishment in the hope of eventual justice. They were the species that delivered justice when all other options had been exhausted. The galaxy had finally learned why humans had spent so much time perfecting the art of war while preaching the virtues of peace. It wasn't because they were hypocrites or because they were weak. It was because they understood that lasting peace could only be built on the foundation of strength sufficient to deter those who would choose violence over cooperation. The Stellar Council had made its final blunder when it dismissed humanity's diplomatic protests over the destruction of New Haven Colony. In that moment of casual dismissal, they had ended 3 centuries of human patience and unleashed a species that had spent generations preparing for the war they hoped never to fight. Humanity had ended all talks, and the galaxy was better for it. Humans end all talks. The Stellar Council finally understands their blunder. HFY Stories. HFY Sci-Fi.